To see you, Representative.
You
I want to
too,
start
Trish.
with Mr. Mueller. Do you think he needs to be investigated? Do you think he is not as unbiased in this investigation as he purports to be?
I think there are so many questions around this, especially after the hearing that took place on the Hill yesterday with Christopher Wray and his answers to members of the Judiciary Committee who held that hearing, looking at what had transpired with the FBI investigation. And I think more questions were raised about Russia, about the dossier, about the knowledge the FBI did or did not have. And I think you're going to see more looking into that. And of course, that leads to Mueller and the situation that is there. What is legitimate? What is not? Did the DNC pay Fusion GPS for this? Who paid Steele, who then got this report from the Russians? Was that used to receive the FISA warrant? Just a lot of questions going there. So, you know,
well, that's
Trish,
certainly what's been circulated, right? I mean, Representative, they've talked about, okay, Fusion GPS, which is basically this political hit job operation where they'll go and dig up anything they can on you. And they may have been fed information by the Russians. Christopher Steele, the ex-British spy that was working for Fusion GPS, got a bunch of bad intel from the Russians. And then somehow our government is treating this document seriously enough, even though if you read the thing, it sounds like it's straight out of the National Enquirer, as a piece of opposition research.
Well, and that's right. And then what my constituents are saying to me here in Tennessee is, how can the government use an agency of the government for a political operation? How could this possibly have happened? And I tell you why that is such something that people are latching on to. They know what happened with the IRS targeting the Tea Party and conservative organizations. And they're beginning to go, wait a minute. This is not what we're supposed to be doing with the federal government, and they are asking us, please get to the bottom of this. It doesn't matter if it's the EPA or the IRS or the FBI. This is not the way things are to happen, because we are to be a nation of laws. We're to abide by the rule of law. Yeah,
and we can't be struggling with some kind of suppressive government that is running amok and doing things it shouldn't do. You know, Greg Jarrett, a colleague of ours and frequent guest on this show, he was making the point that he didn't like the idea of what the FBI even was doing in terms of going after Paul Manafort in the middle of the night, and that this is increasingly becoming scary stuff. You agree?
It is. Yes, I do agree with that. And it is of concern to our constituents who are beginning to say, I've had some of them say to me, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm going to let you know this makes me really uneasy, what we're beginning to hear. And they want things to come back to that just solid footing where we know that we are all abiding by the rule of law, and that the agencies in the federal government is working by the rule of law. They want that confidence and that assurance. They want transparency in government. They want accountability from the agencies to the legislative branch of government. They want the legislative branch to be accountable to our constituents who send us to D.C. to do this job. So I think that we use this as one of those catalysts to get change, to get accountability. And I applaud my colleagues for the job that they did yesterday. I think they raised some very important questions that our constituents are all wanting to receive answers for these actions.
Understandably so. Well, thank you, Representative Marsha Blackburn. It is good to see you.
Good to see you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you as well.
Well, there are new revelations that Special Counsel Robert Mueller's legal team is nothing more than a pack of attack dogs with disturbing ties to the Democratic Party. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Mueller's investigator, Andrew Weissman, attended Hillary Clinton's election night party last November. And, of course, he's also the guy who, well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Attorney Aaron Zebley, there's his picture. He's known as Mueller's right-hand man. Turns out he previously represented the former Hillary Clinton IT aide who destroyed Clinton's BlackBerries with a hammer. And just yesterday, we learned that another Mueller investigator, Jeannie Ray, represented former Obama National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes and the Clinton Foundation, as well as Hillary Clinton herself, in a lawsuit seeking access to her private emails. Well, what about all of that? Joining me now to talk about it, Chris Farrell, who's Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. Chris, good to see you. There are so many highly qualified, experienced, and skilled lawyers across America who do not have a political axe to grind. Had Mueller chosen them, it would have lent credibility and integrity to his investigation. He chose not to do that. Are you concerned that the Mueller team, including Mueller himself, have extreme political bias and corrupt motives?
Their credibility is now something less than zero. I mean, it's between the conflicts of interest, and you just outlined a number of them, and then the unlawful or at least highly questionable investigative tactics that have been employed so far. And I have reason to believe that even Chairman Nunes from the Intelligence Committee has been lied to over and over again with respect to this unmasking issue. When you combine all that and you realize that in large part it's the same cast of characters, the same inner circle, who are willfully blind with respect to the Clinton Foundation and Mrs. Clinton's server and Uranium One, et cetera, yet they have excruciating attention to detail on other really minor matters, their credibility is shot. And arguably, there are people involved who aren't just making administrative errors or aren't in some way failing to dot I's and cross T's. They're involved in criminal misconduct, in the abuse of the investigative system and their procedures. This is horrific. There needs to be a special counsel now for the special counsel.
Right. A watchdog looking at the watchdogs.
Correct.
I wrote a column today on FoxNews.com. You can check it out on our front page. It's entitled "Robert Mueller and His Politically Biased Team of Prosecutors Must Go." Let me quote just one part of it, and we'll put it up on the screen. Mueller deliberately assembled a team of partisans with a history of political bias who appeared determined to undo the results of the 2016 presidential election and drive President Trump from office. Because Mueller improperly stacked the deck of his special counsel staff with biased crusaders, he transformed what was supposed to be an impartial investigation into an illegitimate and seemingly corrupt one. To restore integrity, Attorney General Jeff Sessions should unrecuse himself for the limited purpose of cleaning up Mueller's mess. What do you think about that? I've looked into the law, the regulations. There's nothing to prevent Jeff Sessions from stepping in and saying, wait a minute, this is illegitimate. It has the appearance of impropriety, bias, and corruption. I am going to remove Mueller and all of the partisans on that team and replace them with people who are not.
Greg, you nailed it. They need to get fresh blood from the outside. Mueller's been conflicted since day one when it comes to his buddy Comey. The abusive process and the abuse of investigative powers and authority here, like I said before, I believe is criminal. No one believes anything that they're doing. They spent $7 million in order to go after Paul Manafort with a no-knock pre-dawn warrant and to charge him about spending too much money on his suits, and then go after General Flynn with the absolute thinnest of 1001 false official statement charges. No other charges concerning anything like conspiracy. No one yet can name what the criminal predicate is. What crime occurred?
Right.
No one can tell you. No one.
Well, nobody has had legal standing to challenge the legality of the appointment until somebody was charged. Now we have several people charged who could do it. Let me talk to you about Andrew Weissman, the so-called pit bull prosecutor who has strong allegiance to Democrats. This is a guy who was there at Donald Trump's opponent's, election night party. He's also a guy who wrote a fawning letter to Sally Yates, which is a clear anti-Trump bias. And he's also a guy who has close ties to Hui Chen. He hired her. They have a long history together. And there she is protesting Trump outside the White House, posting it on her Twitter account proudly. Weissman is a guy who has to go. Do you agree?
I couldn't agree more. It's a disgrace that anybody even thought he could get past, the sniff test on this. Here's a guy who's so far hard over anti-Trump and pro-Hillary Clinton. I don't know how anybody can look themselves in the mirror over this one. I would love to see if there's some video isolation of Weissman in the Javits Center, staring at a screen and crying.
Right.
This is a case where the guy's credibility is zero. His own colleagues, there's one assistant U.S. attorney who referred to him as a legal terrorist. This is a guy who goes overboard.
He had an ethics complaint that's 100 pages long. I've read it, in which he's accused of hiding evidence and threatening witnesses in the most unprincipled, thuggish way. We got to leave it at that, Chris.
Sure.
But the bottom line here is Robert Mueller has sabotaged the credibility of his own investigation. Chris.
They're done.
Chris Farrell, thanks very much.
Meanwhile, Fox News is saying that a top Justice Department official has been demoted. This seems to follow a familiar drill here, a probe of contacts with the founder of Fusion GPS, the firm behind that Trump dossier, to ACLJ Executive Director Jordan Sekulow. Jordan, what do you make of this?
I think this again goes to that point. We do not know enough about what the FBI and the Department of Justice were doing with Fusion GPS. But now if they're starting to demote people, and you have to wonder, the House, the Senate, they all want to know, and I think all the American people want to know how much money, if any money, was exchanged. We know there was a contract that was put in place. We don't know if it was ever executed between the FBI, which is overseen by the DOJ, and Fusion GPS to continue work on this so-called dossier. And now we have an official that is being demoted. We've had two officials from the special counsel's teams be demoted, one for sending 10,000 plus texts, some that included anti-Trump text, and that was a top FBI official. He's demoted. Another official there he was having an affair with, also demoted from the special counsel's team. So it seems like, again, while you've got, I know Director Wray was testifying today, but next week the acting attorney general for this Russia matter, Rod Rosenstein, has got to testify before Congress, and I expect a lot of questions on this, Neil.
Now, Rosenstein, of course, was the guy who appointed the special prosecutor, Bob Mueller, of course, who fired the one who was sending the nasty text about Trump, the separate issue. But I'm always wondering, and you're a very, very good lawyer. I'm not, but I've watched a lot of legal shows, so I think I could count as an expert. That one of the things I do notice is that you want to leave a trail of suspicion. That is, if you eventually want to appeal or fight a decision that comes down that's not friendly to you, and that in the Trump administration, maybe the suspicion is that Bob Mueller has a bias, the FBI, the investigation itself is biased, and that they can point back to these if it doesn't go their way. What do you think?
Well, I think when you actually have officials that are being demoted by Mueller because they are sending, they are biased, admittedly so. They didn't fight back against that. They were demoted. Two officials now from the special counsel's team have already been demoted. One is being reviewed, and he's a top official, Andrew Weissman.
But I guess what I'm saying is if Mueller did demote and or fire some of these people, there might be others, does that prove that he himself is trying to be very vigilant and fair about this, or does it taint whatever is going on?
I think the more and more people that get involved, Neil, and get demoted, the more it taints. Honestly, I think that, after a while, if you start demoting all of your top people, so far these have been top people that have been demoted, then you're tainting your investigation. You're not helping your investigation out, and especially when the American people and those who are fighting back on this and trying to learn about this and funding it, like Congress, aren't learning about it until months later. I mean, that happened in August, and we don't learn about it until December. That is absurd. I also think this idea that, these retractions on the Deutsche Bank story, that undermines the investigation of the special counsel when they allow a false report to hang out there for so long that they subpoenaed records on Donald Trump that they did not. That they,
is that official, by the way, that never happened? The accusation was that Deutsche Bank sometime back had been asked to hand over any records regarding Donald Trump or his associates, so their finances, which is something that the president indicated earlier would be a line crosser there.
A red line, right. Right, and now you've got the news agencies that reported that. It was Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, who broke it initially. They've all retracted that story and said it's associates. The AFP actually said, Neil, which it makes more sense, it was likely, the subpoena was likely for, in relation to Paul Manafort. And we know his charges had nothing to do with the President of the United States.
All right. Yeah, it's not very clear what the position is on that. Jordan Sekala, thank you very, very much. Good seeing you again.